Welcome to the complete regular expressions course. Have you ever needed to validate an email, check if a password is strong enough, search for a specific pattern in text, or replace parts of a string? These are exactly the kinds of problems that regular expression is designed to solve. In this course, you won't just learn the theory. You will practice every new concept by solving real coding challenges. Throughout the course, you will complete more than 15 Regex challenges, starting with the basics like character classes and quantifiers, and finishing with more advanced topics like Lookahead, Lookbehind, and more. To follow this course, you only need basic JavaScript knowledge. If you already know variables, if statements, loops, and functions, you are ready to start. So let's learn regular expressions by solving challenges. Learn basics of regex in JavaScript. At first, imagine that you are solving a code challenge and this is the function that you need to implement. The function name is validate input contains digits that expects one parameter username. So you need to check that the parameter username contains any digits. Type of this parameter is a string and the function itself should return true or false. For example, if I call this console log, it should return false, true, and true. And this is because the first parameter dragon doesn't contain any digits. The second parameter dragon123 contains this digit part 123, and the same with the player, it contains 99. So if you think how to solve it without knowing of regex, you will find that this challenge is not so simple. So at first you will need to convert this string into an array, and then you need to iterate through each character inside of this array in order to find does it contain any numbers or not. But with regex we can solve this challenge in just 3 lines. So regex is a string scanner, so it can go through an entire string and then find some specific patterns that are inside of the string. Then for solving this challenge with regex we need to learn the basics of regex. And for learning regular expressions we have this handy website like Regex 101. So if you will follow to this website, the initial view will very similar to this one. So here we have an input for regex pattern. Here we have our input for text string, and then on the right hand side we have different tabs. So at first I would collapse the explanation tab and the quick reference tab. So now I see only match information tab, and this is basically the console log. Then you will also be able to find some default flags. So right after the slash you will find some flags. So let's click it and then let's deselect them. And now we have an empty page and we are ready to learn about regular expressions. Now I added the example strings. So in that first, let's solve the simplest challenge for regex. Let's find that inside of this text string, we have the word dragon. And all what I need for that is to just write this word inside of this input, and then the regex will scan our text string to find this word. And if we see any matches, you will find them in the match information tab. So now we have one match because we have one word dragon in our string. So now let's find the player. And now you can see that we selected the player, but we don't select these 2 digits after the player. And also, if I write player in lowercase, you will find that we don't have any matches, and this is because by default the regular expression is case sensitive. So it means that lowercase letters and uppercase letters are different. If we want to make our regular expression case insensitive, for that we need to add a new flag. So for adding flags, we need to find this slash, and then let's click it. And here you will see all flags that regex has. So we need to find the insensitive flag that makes our match case insensitive. If I click here, you'll find that right after the slash, we see a new letter I. So flags are basic settings that we can configure for our pattern. And now you also see that with this flag, we found the player with a capital P letter. Then let's again write the dragon. And now you can see that we have only one match, even though that we have the word dragon 2 times inside of our string. And this is because by default, if the regular expression pattern finds the first match, it stops the search. So if we want to find multiple matches inside of our string, for that we have another flag. which is global. And here you see the description that don't return after first match. So if I add this flag, you will see that our pattern finds 2 matches. So here one important thing, that the order of flags is not important. So now you see letters I, G, but also if I reorder them, so now we see G, I, the result will be the same. But let's return back to our challenge. We want to find if this string contains any digits. So for example, if we want to find that this text contains the digit 1, we can just write 1, and then we can see in the match information, do we have any matches or not? And the same with all other numbers. But here is the problem. We accept any number inside of the string. So it means that all these numbers are acceptable for our challenge, but we can't write them in this way because it would mean that we are searching for literally this string. So if I copy it and paste somewhere in our test string, you'll find that now our pattern matches. But this is not the behavior that we want. We just want to find 0 or 1 or 2 or 3 and so on. In this case, we can enclose our characters into square brackets. And now you will see 5 different matches in the match information tab, because now we converted all our digits to a character class. So basically it means that we want to select one of these characters. Also you see that all these numbers are in the incremental order, and for this case we have a shorthand, so I can just write 0-9, and if you hover over these numbers you'll find that this is a range. So now we accept any number that is in this range from 0 to 9. Now you see that we have 5 different matches, but basically it should be enough to solve our challenge. I return back to VS Code, and also on the left side we see the console. So if I save the current file, you will see 3 times word undefined in the console, and this is because our function doesn't return anything. So at first let's write a regex pattern that we wrote on this website. So at first I create a new variable regex pattern, and then I write 2 slashes. So the same slashes that we use for writing comments. But now I can write our pattern inside of these slashes. And then if you hover over the regex pattern, you will see that the type of this pattern is a regular expression. If you write regex pattern dot, you will see the list of all properties and functions that the regex has. So one of the functions is called test. So we will use this function, and if you look to the description of this function, you will see that this function expects one input parameter string and it returns a boolean, so true or false. So and basically it works in the way that if the match was found, it returns true, and otherwise it returns false. So now here we can pass the username, and then let's store the result into a separate variable. And now let's return the result. And if I save this file, you will see in the console false, true, true. So if the input is just a dragon without any numbers, it returns false, and otherwise if our input contains any digits, it returns true. And the result in the console matches with the result that we have expected. It means that our function works correctly. Now let's continue with the next challenge. So now you will need to implement the function extract all stats that expects one parameter stats. The type of this parameter is a string, and this function should return an array of numbers. So for example, we pass these 3 different inputs. So in the first input you see HP is 100 and XP is 250, and then in the result we see an array with 2 numbers, 100 and 250. And also you can see that these numbers are enclosed into quotes, which means that the type of these numbers is a string. Then for the second input, damage 20, we have an array with just one number 20. And then for a random string that doesn't contain any digits, we just return an empty array. I return back to this website, and here I updated our test string, so now it contains all these inputs. And you see that our current pattern detects all these numbers individually. So for example, instead of the number 100, we see 3 different matches, 1, 0, 0. And this is because this character class matches a single character from this set. In order to specify the length of our pattern, we can add the curly braces, and now inside of the curly braces we can write the length. So for example 1, in this case we have absolutely the same result, but if I will write 2, you will see that now we have matches 10, 25 and 20. So it means that we select numbers with the length of 2. And if I type 3, Now you see only two matches, 100 and 250, because we select only numbers that consist of 3 digits. But in this way, I configure only the static length of our pattern. But what if I want a range? So for example, we want a range from 1 to 3. In this case, the first number will be 1, and then I need to write comma, and then I specify the end of the length. And now if you hover over, you will see that this is a quantifier that matches between 1 and 3. So it means that all numbers that contain a length from 1 to 3 will be selected. But if we don't want to add these limitations, so basically we want to select from 1 until the end, we can remove the second number, but we can keep the comma, and in this case you will see that the range will be from 1 until the unlimited. So now it should be enough for solving the code challenge, and on this time I will just copy this pattern by clicking this button. Then I go back to the Visual Studio Code. Here in the console you see 3 times undefined. So now let's implement our function. So at first let's create the variable Regex pattern. Then for finding all values that match this pattern, we need to call a different function. So for that, I will write the stats.match. And here you can see that this is a function that is attached to the string. So stats is a string. And then this function expects one parameter, which is a string or a regular expression. So we will pass our regular expression pattern. And now let's store the results into a separate variable. And then let's return the results. If I save this function, we will see a very close but not the same outcome that we expect. So let's check each input individually. So for the input with HP 100 and XP 250, we have the right outcome. Then the same for the input with a damage, it can successfully find this number 20. But then for a random string, it returns a null. But we want to return an array instead of null if we don't have any matches. So it means that we need to write an additional if statement. So basically, if the result is equal to null, in this case I want to return an empty array. And then because here I call the keyword return, I don't even need to write the else statement for the main result. And now if we save this file, you will see that for a random string, we see an empty array. And if I check all these inputs, you will see that we have the right results. So it means that our function works correctly. Not operator and shorthands in regex. In this code challenge, you will need to implement the function countAllWords that expect one parameter text. This function should count all words from the input text. We count numbers as words. The type of the input text is a string, and the function itself should return a number. And these are example inputs and the expected results. In the first input, we have 2 words, red dragon and attacks. So the first word is separated by underscore. In the second input, we have 3 words, so don't be jealous. And the word don't is separated by backtick. In the third input, we have 4 words, so we count numbers as separate words. And the fourth input is an edge case, which is an empty string. In this case, our program should return 0. At first, I need to write a regex pattern. And for that, I go to the website regex101.com. Here I put all example inputs into the text string, so in the match information tab, we will be able to see our matches. So at first, try solving this challenge your own. And now, let's solve it together. We want to count how many words we have. So at first, let's determine what can be inside of one word. Words can contain all English letters. So for that, let's create a character class. And inside of this class, let's put all English letters. But instead of writing A, B, C and so on, we have a range. The same as for numbers. So we have a range from A to Z. And if you hover over this, you will see that this is a range. Right now, we have only one match, and this is because we don't have any flags. So let's activate our flags by clicking this slash. And here, let's choose 2 flags. So at first, the global flag. Now our function will look for all the matches that satisfies our pattern. And then let's also put case insensitive flag so that our pattern would treat uppercase letters and lowercase letters in the same way. Now we see many matches in our console, but the first problem is that the character class by default selects only a single character. So the length of our matches will be equal to 1. So let's explicitly write it. So we can control the length of our match by putting curly braces. Now I wrote 1 and it works absolutely in the same way because this is the default. Then I will add comma. And now if we hover over this quantifier, we will see that this quantifier has the length from 1 to unlimited. And now we can see that our pattern almost works. So for the first line, it can find 3 matches: red, dragon, and attacks. Now it counts the red dragon as one word, and this is because we don't count the underscore. So let's add this underscore to the character class. So now from the first input, we can find 2 words, so this is the right answer. Then from the second input, we also see that something doesn't work, and this is because we don't take into account the backtick of the word don't. So let's add it to our pattern. Now the second line also works, so we successfully can find 3 matches. And then on the last line, I see that we don't take into account the numbers. So let's also add a range of numbers. And now I see that our pattern successfully works, so let's copy it and let's solve our challenge. Now on the right side, I see the VS Code, and on the left side, I see a console with 4 times word undefined. So now it means that we are connected to the browser and we can start to solve our challenge. So at first, let's create a variable with the regex pattern. Then we need to use this pattern in one of the regex functions. At this point we know 2 functions, test and match, and I think that match suits perfectly because it returns an array of all matches that satisfy this pattern. So for that, I call the method match that is attached to a string, and the input text that we pass has the type of string. So now let's store the result into a separate variable. And then let's return the result. Now, if you look to the console, you will see that instead of the number, we return an array of words. But each array has a parameter length that we see here in the console. If I will call the parameter length, from the first line, I will get the number 2. From the second line, I will get the number 3. From the third line, I will get the number 4. And the only problem now that we have is with the final line. So currently, if we don't have any matches, the .match function returns a null. And now we need to handle this case because if we try to call the .length method on the null, we will get an error. So at first, let's try to call .length method. Then you will see this error in the console, but if I comment out the last input, you will see the right answers for all the remaining inputs. And this is the main reason why I added this edge case. So you should think about the cases that can throw an error inside of your function. And as I said before, all what we need is just to handle the null. Now I check that if the match result is equal to null, in this case I return 0. And then I definitely know that match result variable is an array that contains a property length. So I don't have any errors anymore. Our function works correctly. But now let's talk about shorthands that can help our regex to be more readable. At first, let's start from quantifiers. In regex, we have several common quantifiers, and one of them is that we are using right now. This quantifier with the length from 1 until unlimited is very common, so instead of writing it inside of the curly braces, you can just write plus, and it will work absolutely in the same way. And if you hover over the plus, you will see the same description as we had before, which means that they work in the same way. Now let's look to other common quantifiers. So at first, we will need to learn about zero length in regex. And for that, I have added this simple text string. Let's find the G letter. For that, you can just type a letter G, and the default length of this letter is 1. Let's explicitly show this length. So now it works in the same way, but with regex, instead of the length 1, we can add length 0. And if I put the length 0, you will see a very strange outcome that now in the match information we see a lot of empty strings. And then in the text string you see these columns with purple blocks. And if you think logically about this pattern, we are looking for the letter G and the amount of letters that we want to find is 0. So it means that we are searching for nothing. And regex reacts on this kind of construction in the way that it selects all possible empty strings inside of our text text string. I have never seen that it was useful in any patterns, but this is a common problem that you might be faced in the future. So now if you see that your regex returns empty strings, it means that you specified for regex to search for nothing. So zero length itself is not useful, but what if we want to find a range from 0 to 1? In this case, you start to see that we are not looking only for empty strings, but in some cases, we also have matches with just a letter G. And this kind of construction oftenly called optional. So because we are looking for G letters with the length 0, so nothing, or we are looking for the G letter with the length 1. Again, this construction itself is not very useful, but if we add one more letter inside of this pattern, so for example A, in this case, you see that we don't select empty strings anymore. And this is because inside of our pattern, we have a required parameter A that our regex must find. And then after it, we have an optional parameter G that might be followed after the letter A. If you look to this text string, you will see that on the first line, we select just the letter A. And this is because inside of our pattern, we require the letter A, and then we require a letter G with length 0 or 1. If we don't have the letter G after the letter A, it means that the length of this letter is 0. The first line satisfies this pattern. On the second line, we have both letters A and G. And this line also satisfies our pattern because now we have one letter A and one letter G. So the letter G with length 1. And then you see on the next lines that we only select AG from the string. So we don't select the last letter G. This quantifier is very often in regex. So for that we have a separate shorthand, which is a question mark. If you hover over this question mark, you will see that the length of this mark is from 0 until the 1. And also you might see a slight white border around the letter G, which means that this quantifier is attached only to the letter G. And this is actually a very good symbol for showing optional, because in many programming languages, if we want to specify that some kind of parameter is optional, we put question mark after this parameter. But now let's return back to a full version of the quantifier. And now what if I want to select the range from 0 until the unlimited? In this case, I write 0 and then comma, and if I hover over it, you will see that the length is from 0 until unlimited. And now you can see that we select a letter A, and then we also select a letter G if it follows after the A, but because the final range is unlimited, we can put as many G letters as we want after the letter A. And this is also a very common quantifier that we use. So for that, we have a separate shorthand, which is an asterisk. So if you hover over it, you will see the same description, and you will see that it is also attached only to the G letter. Now let's return back to the challenge that we had, and now let's talk about the shorthands for character classes. So the first shorthand that we have is /v, and if you hover over this shorthand, you will see that this is equivalent to a character class that contains all English letters, numbers, and also underscore. And a letter V is an abbreviation for a word, so this shorthand contains all symbols that are counted as words. But now we see that we have duplication inside of our character class, so let's remove the duplicated part. So at first I remove the range from A to Z, then I also can remove the range from 0 to 9, and then I also can remove underscore. But I can't remove a backtick because backtick is not inside of this shorthand. And now as you see, it works in the same way, but this pattern looks much smaller. So let's also test this pattern inside of our function. Now I paste this pattern, and now you see that we have the same outcome in our console. And in the beginning, it might be much more difficult for you to read this kind of patterns, but if you try to Google a regex pattern, or if you try to generate it with AI, with high probability, you will find these shorthands inside of the patterns. And after some time, when you get used to these shorthands, you will find that they're actually easier to read. I have added 2 new console logs. So the first one contains an email, and the second one contains 2 separate words. But if we look only to an email input, you will see that our program counts 3 words instead of 1 inside of this input. And if you think how to modify this pattern, you will find that there are many symbols that we need to add inside of this character class. But actually at some point, you will find that it is not possible to take into account all possible symbols that can be between the words. But what we can take into account is that that all words are divided by space. Or maybe inside of one large input, we also can have tabs or new line symbols. And there is actually another approach how we can solve this challenge, and this is by dividing our words with a space symbol. Now I added these inputs to the website, and then let's try to solve this challenge by separating words only with a space symbol. So at first, let's clean our character class, and then let's add a space. And now you can see that we have only matches of the space symbol. And also because we use quantifier from 1 until unlimited, even if a word contains several spaces, we will match all of them. And now what I actually want to do is I want to select everything except of these symbols. And for that we have a not operator in regex, which looks like a caret symbol. Now you see that we select everything except of the space, but actually there are also other space symbols that we don't want to include. So for example, a new line. For putting a new line inside of the character class, we need to write a \n. So in the same way as we wrote in JavaScript. And now you can see that the email input is treated as one word. And this is because it doesn't contain any spaces. So now we can use this pattern for solving our challenge, but actually we have a shorthand for that. For selecting white space symbols, we have a shorthand \s. And if you look to the character class that it is equal to, you'll find that it contains many different space symbols. Let's write some of them. For example, /r is a courage return symbol, so we might have it as a space separator inside of some inputs. Also, there is /f that might be used inside of the forms. In a similar way, there can be /v that is used for vertical white spaces. And the last one is /t, which is tab. So these are one of the most common space symbols, and instead of writing all of them, we can just use a shorthand /s. So now you see that our pattern works in the same way, but actually, even for this character set, we have a shorthand. Now what we select is the opposite from the space symbols. So we select everything except of the space characters. And for that we have a shorthand which is / and capital letter S, and if you hover over it, you will see that in the beginning of the character class it contains a caret symbol which is a not operator. And also this shorthand contains square brackets, so we can even remove them. And this is the shortest solution that we can use to count how many words we have inside of the string. So it contains only 3 characters. I understand that all these shorthands can be very overwhelming and you don't even need to memorize them. Actually, if we want to find all of them, let's close the Match Information tab and let's open the Quick Reference tab. And here inside of the section Common Tokens, you will see all common syntax that is used in regex. And if you scroll a little bit down, you will see /s symbol. So we can click it and then we will see a description that it matches any space, tab or new line. And also you will see a capital letter S, which matches anything other than a space, tab or new line. In the same way you can find other shorthands, for example /d, which is equal to a range of numbers. And in the same way, a capital letter means that this is the same range but with a not operator before it. So it is equal to anything other rather than a decimal or digit. But now let's copy this pattern and paste into our function. Now I have the shortest regex pattern for this solution. As you see, all these numbers from the console match with the numbers that we have expected. So it means that our function works correctly. Escape symbol in regex. Let's continue learning about regex by solving this code challenge. In this challenge, you will need to implement the function detect command that expects one parameter, user input. So you will need to detect if there are any special commands in user input. Let's assume that there are 2 main special commands. The first one is /help and the second special command is /play. So if user types /help somewhere in the text, you will need to return the message, how can I help you? And in a similar way, if user types /play somewhere in the text, you will need to return the message, start a new game. If user types both special commands in one sentence, in this case, we return the first matched command. And if the sentence doesn't contain any special commands, in this case, we just return the user input. And the type of user input is a string. And these are example inputs. In the first input, we see that user wrote the message, please help me, and then /help. So we see that this is a special command, and this is the reason why our function returns the message, how can I help you? I don't put quotes around this message, but the type of this message is a string. Then we have the second example when user types /play inside of the sentence. So and this is the reason why we return the message, start a new game. Then we have the input where user didn't provide any special keywords, so we just return the same message as the user provided. And the final input is an edge case when we have both commands. But you see that the command play comes first, so this is the reason why we return the message, start a new game. Now I am in the website regex101.com, and before solving this challenge yourself, let's talk about the theory that we need to know to solve this code challenge. I put the example strings into the text string area, and now let's look to the first line. We see that in this sentence, please help me /help, we want to select only special help keyword. If I want to select the keyword help, I can just type it here. And now you see that the first occurrence help have been selected, and this is because we don't have any flags. So let's also add the global flag. So we select a common word help and also a word help that is followed by the /. And if you try to select only a special keyword help, you will see an error, and this is because / in regex is a special symbol. And if you hover over this special symbol, you will see that delimiter must be escaped. So basically it shows the solution for our problem, but to better understand this problem, let's return back to VS Code. Now let's create a new variable with regex pattern. In the beginning, I put 2 slashes, and as we know, in JavaScript, we use 2 slashes to make comments. But then inside of these 2 slashes, I can write our regex pattern. In this case, if I hover over the regex pattern, you will see that the type of this variable is regular expression. So now JavaScript knows that this is not a comment, this is a regular expression. But what happens if I add one more slash inside of this pattern? You will see that JavaScript interpreted this symbol as a special symbol for comments. Now, if you hover over the same variable, you will see that the type of this variable is any. So if we use 2 slashes, JavaScript doesn't know is it a comment or is it a part of your regular expression. And this is the reason why we need to escape this special symbol by putting a backward slash. And when I type it, you will see that a special symbol is highlighted by the green color. And then if you hover over the variable, you will again see that the type of this variable is regular expression. Now let's return back to this website and let's do the same thing. I put an escape symbol before the slash, and now you will see that we select only a special keyword help. So after putting an escape symbol, you will remove the special meaning of this character. So let's make one more example. I add a question mark after the keyword help, and now I want to select this special keyword /help with question mark. But what we know about question mark is this is a shorthand for quantifier with a range from 0 to 1. So this symbol has a special meaning for regex. But if we literally want to find this symbol, I can escape it by putting a backslash before the symbol. And now in the match information tab, you can see that we select help with a question mark. Now let's return back to our challenge. I selected the first special keyword help, but I also want to select a special keyword play. So let's add it to our regular expression. But if I just add this keyword, you will find that we don't have any matches, and this is because currently we are looking for both these words. But I want to find the keyword help or the keyword play. So in regular expression, we also have or operator, which is a vertical bar symbol. So this is similar to JavaScript, just instead of 2 vertical bars, we put 1 vertical bar. And then if you hover over it, you will find that this is equivalent to Boolean OR. So this is the same as OR operator in JavaScript. And also you will find white slide border around the keyword play. So it means that we select the first keyword help or we select the second keyword play. So this symbol is attached to the second option, which is play. So this border is around the second option of the OR operator. So now you see that we select all special keywords, and it means that we can use this pattern for solving our challenge. Now I am connected to the browser, and on the left hand side you can see 4 times word undefined. And this is because we call the function detect command 4 times, but this function returns nothing. For implementing this function, let's add the pattern that we made. And then I need to call one of the regex functions. We know the test and match functions, and actually both of them suits for this challenge, so you can solve this challenge by using any of these functions. I think that a more natural way is by using match function, so I will use a match function for solving this challenge. Now I wrote a new variable match result, and then let's return this result to see what we have. So now in the console you can see the match result for each console log. So for the first console log we have an array with one keyword help. For the second console log we have an array with a keyword play. Then for the third console log we have a null. So this is important to remember, that the match function can return an array or null. And we need to handle both these cases in order to prevent any errors. And then for the last input we have both these keywords play and then help. So at first I think that we can handle the null. In the description of this function, we had a line that if we don't have any special keywords, we need to return the user input. And now if you look to the console, you will see that on the third line, instead of the keyword null, we return a string hello. Now we definitely know that after this check, the type of the match result will be an array. And this array can contain a word help or a word play. If we need to use several special keywords, I would use a for loop for iterating through an array of special keywords. But in our function, we just need to react on the first special keyword. So I think that we don't even need a for loop. We can access a special keyword by the index 0. And then I need to handle 2 cases. So in the first case, our keyword might be equal to help, and in the second case, our keyword might be equal to play. Now I wrote 2 if statements. In the first if statement, if our special word is equal to help, I return the message, how can I help you? And in the second case, if our special word is equal to play, I return a message, start a new game. And as you see, all our inputs return what we have expected, so it means that our function works correctly. But actually, I want to remove unnecessary parts from this function. So for example, this return, we don't even need it because we handle the null case in this if statement. And here we return the user input. So it means that we can remove this return statement. And also about my choice of using else if statement, I actually wrote it because if we add a new keyword to this function, it will be easy to extend this function. So in this case, I can just copy it and paste. And then instead of this keyword, I can use a new special keyword, for example, info. And then I can return anything. Also, instead of this construction, you can use a switch statement, or in our case, because we have only 2 special keywords, you actually can remove this if statement and you can remain with a simple if else statement. If I save this file, you will also see that it works correctly, and actually there is even a shorter version, which is this version without else statement. So because inside of the if statement we have return, we don't even need to specify the else statement. All these solutions are valid, but I think that the most beginner friendly solution is this one. So here we clearly see that we choose one option or another option. Anchors in regex. Let's continue learning about regex by solving these code challenges. In this code challenge, you will need to implement the function validate username that expects one parameter our username. Username may contain letters, digits, and underscore, and username must be within 5 to 12 characters long, and both these numbers inclusive, so it means that if our string contains 5 characters or 12 characters, they are also valid. And the function itself should return true or false. And now I will show you some of the example inputs. So the first input contains the word dragon, and we return true because this word consists only from letters, and the length of this word is 6, which means that this is a valid input. So the next input is dragon underscore 123. All these characters are valid, and also the length of this username is 10 characters. So and this is the reason why this is a valid input. Then we have a username AB, and this is too short, so this is invalid input. Then we have a username player with exclamation mark. For our function, the exclamation mark is an invalid symbol, and this is the reason why this input is invalid. And finally, we have a very long username that just consists more than 12 characters. So at first, I go to the website regex101.com. So here we can write our regex pattern. And then I put inside of the text string area all the example inputs. And now we remember that the first 2 ones are valid, and then we have 3 invalid inputs. And at first, you might think that this is a pretty easy challenge, so try writing a regex pattern your own. But then let's write it together. So at first, I start from selecting our flags. I think that at this point we can put the global flag. Even though that our function expects only one username, at this point we can check multiple inputs by using the global flag. Before copying this pattern into our code, we will deselect this flag. And also, I think that we can use the case insensitive flag because both the uppercase letters and lowercase letters are valid. So and then let's select the character class of all valid symbols. So at first I can select all letters, then also all numbers, and finally, I add underscore. And now we have a character class that consists of all valid symbols. Also, we have a shorthand for that, so if you want, you can write the \v, and if you hover over it, you will see that this is equivalent to exactly the same character class as we had before. But just for clarity, I will stay with a full version of a character class. So and then we see that each letter is selected individually, and this is because the default length of characters that we select is 1. So I explicitly wrote this quantifier, and now let's select the valid length. We know that the valid length is from the 5 symbols until the 12 symbols. So and this is a truly custom quantifier, and we don't have any shorthand for that. And now if we look to our inputs, we can see that we don't select the AB username anymore. Also from the player, we select only the valid part, and the same with the very long username, we select it with 2 parts. So the first one contains 12 characters and the second one contains 6 characters. And now let's think how to solve this challenge by using this pattern. At this point we know 2 functions, test and match. If you try to use match function, you will get an array of all matches from the match information tab. And here you see that we have usernames like player, but the actual username is player with exclamation mark. Or at the same time, from the last username, we have 2 matches. So at this point, our pattern selects only the valid part within the string. So it means that if we have an array of these matches, we will not be able to detect is it valid or not. The same if we use the test function, because test function returns true or false depending on do we have any matches or not. And if we have any matches, it means that this function will return true. And the problem that we have is, imagine we have only the input player with exclamation mark, and then this pattern selects only the valid part within this string. And eventually we have a match for player, which is really a valid username, but the problem is that the username that was provided from user was different. So what we actually want to select is, we want to select an entire string if this is valid, or we don't want to select anything. And for solving this kind of problem, we actually need to learn a new feature of regex, which is anchors. So we have 2 different types of anchors. So the first anchor is the caret symbol. It can be very confusing because at the same time we use the caret symbol for not operator within a character class. So this is important to understand. If I put a caret symbol inside of the character class, it will actually work as a not operator. So it will select all symbols except of this character class. But if you see the symbol outside of the character class, typically this is in the beginning of the regular expression. In this case, this is anchor. And when you hover over it, you can see that it asserts position at the start of the string. So what it actually means? At this point, we don't see any difference, but if I add an exclamation mark in the beginning of the string, you will see that we don't have any matches anymore. And this is because when we use this anchor, it actually selects a string that satisfies this pattern but starts from the beginning of the string. So with this anchor symbol, our pattern starts to scan the string from the beginning, then it sees the exclamation mark, so this is an invalid symbol, and this is the reason why it stops scanning the rest of the line. At the same time, if I remove this exclamation mark, you'll see that we select the player, and this is because we start the scanning from the beginning of this line, and then we select the first 6 characters because they are inside of the character class, and they also satisfy this quantifier, but then we see an exclamation mark, which is not inside of the character class, which means that this is the end of our match. So, and at this point, Regex completes our scanning, and we have only one match, which is player. So no matter what I write after the invalid symbol, it will not be selected. So the second anchor that we have works in a similar way, but it starts from the end of the line. And now I need to use a dollar symbol, and if you hover over it, you will see that this anchor asserts a position at the end of the string. Now you see that with this anchor, we don't have any matches, and this is because we start scanning from the end of this line. The first symbol that we see is invalid, so we finish our scanning. But if I remove the symbol, or if I put it in the beginning of the string, you will see that we select the word player, but then we stop scanning when we reach the exclamation mark. And now what we commonly have, both these anchors at the same time. So this is a very common use case when we use both these anchors, and now we create a box where we select all the strings that satisfy our pattern. So basically now, no matter where I put the exclamation mark, in the end or in the beginning, if we have at least one invalid symbol within this line, it will not be selected. Now let's try another input, very long username. So at first, let's look to this input without any anchors. Now you see that we have 2 matches, and this is because of the quantifier. Then we also have common letters. They are inside of the character class, so we just select them as a separate match. Now I put the first anchor, and then you see that we have only one match. So we start scanning our string from the start of a new line, and then we see that all the symbols are valid, so we select the first 12 symbols, and the next symbol is also a letter, so this is inside of the character class, but it doesn't start from the beginning of a new line. And this is the reason why we stop scanning this line on this letter. Now let's try to use the second anchor, and now you see that we have a very similar situation. So we select the first 12 symbols from the end of the line, and then we have the letter L, which is inside of the character class, but this letter doesn't start from the end of a new line, and this is the reason why we stop scanning this line. And then when I use both these anchors, we create this box, and now an entire line must satisfy our condition. So we see that all the symbols are within our character class, so character class is satisfied, but then we have our quantifier that says that we might only have 5 until 12 symbols. On this line, we have 18 symbols, which is more than 12, and this is the reason why we don't have any matches. When we use both these anchors, we basically say that an entire line must satisfy the condition in order to be matched. And if any part, any single detail doesn't match the condition, we don't select anything. I hope that with these examples, you start to understand how anchors work, but don't worry if you don't understand them fully. It actually takes time to get used to the anchors. Now we can use this pattern for solving our challenge. But as I said before, we can remove the global flag because we want to validate only one username. I return back to our code, and now on the left side, you see 5 times the word undefined from 5 different console logs. And now it means that we are connected to the browser and we can start solving our challenge. So at first, let's add the pattern inside of this function. Then we need to use one of the regex functions. So we know 2 functions, match and test. And in this case, because we want to check just one word, I think that we can use the test function. And now let's return the result of the test function. And then in the console, you can see true, true, and false, false, false. So these are actually the results that we have expected, and this means that our function works correctly. Now let's continue with the next challenge. In this challenge, you have a function extract to-do lines that expects one parameter text. So this is a string that might contain several lines. And this function should extract all to-do lines from the input text. Each to-do must start at the beginning of a line. And the function itself should return an array of to-do lines. And this is the first example input. So you see that we have a to-do create login. Then we have the \n symbol, which means a new line. Then you see done with profile, so we don't select it. And then we again have a new line. And then you see the second to-do fix menu. And the outcome is an array of two strings. The next example is similar, but here we have only one to do. So in the array we have only one to do line. And then we have an example where we have to do, but it doesn't start from a new line, so we return an empty array. Now I added the first example input into the text string area, and then you can try writing a pattern that will select only to do lines. So from this input it should find 3 matches. But before you start writing this pattern, I want to show you one symbol. In Regex we have a dot, and if you hover over it, you will find that this is a shorthand that matches any character except of the new lines. So this symbol might be useful in solving this challenge, because after the to do with colon we might have any text, and no matter what we have there, it will be valid. So now try writing this pattern yourself, but then let's write it together. So again, in the beginning, let's choose flags that we want to use. I think that this time we can add only the global flag, but actually if you add case insensitive flag, it will not be wrong, so you can use it. But I think that I will solve this challenge in the way that I want to select only to-dos in uppercase. So then let's write to-do inside of the pattern. And now you already see that we have 3 matches. But also I want to select the rest of the line, and for that I can add dot, and then I can add plus. So, and now we use 2 shorthands. So dot means a character class of any characters, and then plus is a quantifier from 1 until unlimited. And also you see this white slide border around the dot, which means that this quantifier is attached only to our character class. And basically you might think that this is the solution for this challenge, but then I also add one example input that currently is selected, but that actually shouldn't be selected. And this is because in the description of our function, we had this line that to do must start at the beginning of a new line. Currently you know about anchors, and you know that we have a caret symbol for putting an anchor that requires this pattern to be from the beginning of a new line. But if I try to use it, you will see that we have only one match. And this is because by default, if we use anchors, they scan only one line. But if you want to scan multiple lines, we need to add a new flag. And this flag is called multi-line flag. And here in the description you see that both these anchors match start and end of line. So basically, if you activate this flag, you will see that currently we have only 3 matches and we don't select the last to do anymore. So now you can use this pattern for solving the challenge. Again, try solving it yourself, but then if you have any problems, compare your solution with mine. I'm connected to the browser, and now you see undefined in our console. At first, I add our pattern inside of this function. I will use the match function because match function returns all matches that we have inside of the array. And now we need to remember that match function can return a null or an array. So if we don't have any matches, it will return a null. So at first, let's handle null. And now you see that if we have a null, I return an empty array, and then in the else statement, I return the match result. And now if you look to the console, you will see that these answers are absolutely the same as the answers that we have expected. So it means that our function works correctly. Word boundary in Regex. Let's continue learning about Regex by solving this code challenge. In this challenge, you will need to implement the function countExactCat that expects one parameter text, which is a string. So this function should count how many times exact word cat appear in the text. do not count cat inside bigger words like catapult, or if cat contains numbers or underscore, like underscore cat123 is also invalid cat, and the function itself should return a number. And these are some of the example inputs. In the input cat and dog, we see word cat only one time, and also notice that it starts from the uppercase letter, which means that we count lowercase letters and uppercase letters of a word cat. Then we see an input with cat catapult my cat, and here is important that this function should return the number 2 because we have only 2 words cats inside of this sentence and 1 word cat which is a part of the word catapult, so we shouldn't count it. And the final input doesn't contain any valid cats, so this function should return 0. Now I go to the website regex101.com, and here I put all example inputs into the text string area. So inside of this text string we have only 3 valid cats, and your pattern should match all these 3 valid cats. And now try writing your own regex pattern, but then let's write this pattern together. So at first let's select flags that we will use inside of this pattern. I want to use a global flag because inside of the string we might have more than 1 word cat, and also I want to use case insensitive flag because we also count cats that contain uppercase letters. And now I can start writing my pattern, so let's just write the word cat. And now you exactly see the problem that we have. We select all cats inside of the string, but we also select cat inside of the catapult, and also a cat that is surrounded by underscore and numbers. How to write a filter that will not select cat that is surrounded by letters, numbers, or underscore. So at first let's add this character class here. And now you see that we select only 2 cats that are invalid. And we don't select only cat, we also select the next character after an invalid cat. Okay, but now I want to select all the remaining cats except of these 2. So let's try to use not operator. And now you see that we select only valid cats, but the problem is that we also select the next character after the cat. So eventually we select spaces and exclamation mark. And if you try to think how to write a filter that will not be included into the match itself, you will find that this is not so easy to write. But this is because you don't know about word boundaries. So now let's remove this character class, and then let's surround our cat by word boundary symbol. Now you see that we select only valid cats and we don't select any additional symbols. Let's hover over the word boundary symbol. Here you can see that it asserts position at the word boundary, and then we have quite complex regex pattern that is not so easy to understand. I think that actually it is much easier to understand what word boundary does based on the examples. So at first I add only 1 word boundary before the cat, and what it says is that we select the word cat that doesn't start from letters, numbers, or underscore. And now you can see that we still select the cat inside of the catapult. In the beginning of the cat we don't have numbers, letters, or underscore, we have a space. But we don't select the cat that starts from underscore. And then in the same way, if I add word boundary after the cat, now it says that we select only cat that is not started or ended with letters, numbers, or underscore. And now you also see that we don't select cat inside of the catapult because after the part cat we have a letter A. So basically word boundaries is a feature in regex that helps to solve this kind of problem when one word like cat can be a part of a bigger word like catapult. So now copy this pattern and try solving this challenge your own. But then let's solve it together. Now on the left hand side you can see the console that contains 3 times word undefined. So I'm connected to the browser and I can start solving this challenge, and as always I start from writing the pattern. Then I need to use one of the regex functions, so we know the test and match function. In this case I want to count how many words cat we have. The match function suits perfectly because it returns an array of cats. I also store the result of the match function inside of the match result variable, and now we need to remember that this function might return null if we don't have any matches. So let's handle this case first. If match result is equal to null, in this case I just return 0. And after this check I definitely know that the type of the match result is equal to string that contains cats. So let's write the else statement. And now if inside of the else statement I return match result, you can see that we return an array, but actually I want to count how many elements we have inside of this array. So instead of returning the match array, I can return the property length. And now you can see that results in the console match with the results that we expected, which means that our function works correctly. Also, for practicing word boundary, try solving this challenge. Now you can see the description of this challenge, also the example inputs and the expected outputs. So try solving this challenge your own, and after 5 seconds I will show you my solution. I hope that you solved this challenge yourself, and now you can compare it with my solution. Capture groups in Regex. So at first, I will show you one example that perfectly shows the first use case of capture groups. You have two inputs. On the one line, you have cat, 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 and on the second line, you have cat with many letters T. Now, inside of the regex pattern, I write the word cat. And then let's also activate the global flag. And now you can see 4 matches and each match is equal to word cat. But then I want to add the sign plus, which is a quantifier from 1 until unlimited. But before I add it, please answer the question. Which of these two lines will be selected as one match? Will it be cat, 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 or will it be cat with many T letters? And now you can see that it is the second line, cat with many T letters. And this is because if you hover over the plus sign, you will see that this is a quantifier from 1 until unlimited, and you can see a slight white border around the letter T, which means that this quantifier is attached to the letter T. And currently our pattern says that we are looking for one C letter. So it uses the default quantifier 1. Then we are looking for one A letter, which also uses a default quantifier 1. And then we are looking for T letter from 1 until unlimited times. So this is the same pattern as we had before, but what if I want to attach the quantifier from 1 until unlimited, not to the letter T, but to an entire word cat? So, and eventually I want to select cat, cat, cat as one input. So for that, let's surround the word cat with parentheses. And now, if you hover over the plus sign, you can see the white border around the capture group cat. So, and it means that now this quantifier is attached to an entire word cat. And as you see in the match information tab, the first match contains 3 times word cat in a row. And also you can see that from the second line, we select only the word cat. So we don't select these additional T letters. Just by putting parentheses, we have changed the behavior of our regular pattern. And also what you can notice is that inside of the match information tab, we don't only have matches, we also have groups. And basically it works in this way that at first it shows the match. So we have the first match, cat, 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 and then it shows the group that this match is belonging to. So the first match belongs to the first group, and this is the reason why we see the group 1 after the match 1. And then the same with the second match. So the second match also belongs to the first group, and this is the reason why we see match 2 and then group 1. And here we have one interesting detail, is that the first match contains 3 times word cat, but the first group contains only 1 time word cat. And this is the second powerful concept that we have in capture groups. Capture groups can create submatches inside of our match. So basically this is our first pattern. It creates our matches. But then inside of the capturing group, we have the second pattern. So this pattern is used just inside of this capture group in order to find submatch from our match. So as you see, the capturing group contains just the word cat, so it doesn't contain any additional quantifiers. And this is the reason why it selects just the word cat from the match cat, cat, cat. Now let's look to another example. So I have a text string, which is cat with some numbers. And at first, let's write the regex pattern that will select an entire line. So for that, I write the word cat, and then I create a new character class that contains a range of numbers, and then I attach the quantifier from 1 until unlimited to the character class. And now you can see that an entire line is selected. But then let's create 2 different capture groups. So the first capture group will select just the word cat, and the second capture group will select all numbers after the word cat. This is also important that the second capturing group have to surround the quantifier inside of the capturing group, because we don't want to select just one number, we want to select all numbers after the cat. Now if you look to the match information tab, you can see that we have one match, cat, with numbers, and then we have two different groups. So in the first group, we have just the word cat, and in the second group, we have only numbers. So this is a very handy way how we can separate our match into sub-matches that later we can easily use in our code. But then let's look to the match function with this regex pattern. So for that, I just copy this pattern. And now I go to the Visual Studio Code. So now on the right side, you can see the VS Code, and on the left side, you can see the console that will show the outcomes from the script.js file. So at first, let's create the variable match result. Now I use the match function with our regex pattern, and then I log to the console the match result. So at first, you can see that this is just an array that contains one match. And if I expand this array, you will also see that it contains a normal index and length properties. So this is just a normal array. But then let's hover over the match function, and now you can see that the return type of this function is regular expression match array or null. So what is a regular expression match array? So the first misleading detail about this function is that if we use a G flag inside of our pattern, this function returns a common array where we have only our matches. But if I want to see the capture groups, I need to remove the G flag. And now in the console, you can see a larger array. Let's expand it. And here you see more properties than a common array has. So for example, we have properties like input, index, and groups. So this is exactly the regex pattern match array. This is a normal array that contains additional properties. So at first, you can see 3 different matches and 3 different indexes. If you return back to regex101.com, you can also see 3 matches, but instead of indexes, you see the names of these matches. At first, we have the match 1, it will be with the index 0. Then we have the group 1, it will be with the index 1. And then we have the group 2, it will be with the index 2. So in the console, you can exactly see the first match with the index 0 and then 2 groups. So the first group is this one, it contains just the word cat. And the second group contains numbers, so this is the second group inside of our pattern. And then let's talk about additional metadata that this array has. So the easiest one is input. This is just the string from which we get these results. As you see, this is the same input string as we have here. It can be useful if instead of a literal string as we have inside of our code, we use some kind of variable, and then we want to verify what this variable is equal to. So the second property is index. So this shows from which letter inside of our input our regex pattern found a match. So here it shows 0. It means that starting from the first letter of our input, we got our match. So for example, if I add the word wrong with space before cat, in this case you can see that our index is equal to 6, and this is because the first 6 letters of our input don't match with our regex pattern, and only starting from the 7th letter we have our match. But because indexes are 0 based, we have the number 6 inside of the index property. And the first property that we have is groups. Currently it is equal to undefined. So currently, even though that we have our groups, they only have indexes, but we also can name our groups, and in this case we will see them inside of the groups property. At first, I removed the wrong word from the string, and then let's call our group. For example, I will call the first group animals, and the second group I will call numbers. And now, if you save this pattern, you can see that groups is equal to a JavaScript object, and if we expand it, you will see that the key of the first element is equal to animals and the value is equal to cat. So this is exactly what we have inside of the first group. The name of this group is animals and the value is cat. And then the second group has the name numbers and the value 494949. And this we get from the second group. So now you know the basic theory about capturing groups. So let's practice them by solving this code challenge. In this code challenge, you will need to implement the function extract item damage that has one input item stats. So this function should extract item name and damage value. Item stats property is a string like sword plus 15. And then this function should return a JavaScript object with item and damage. And this is the first example input, so it contains sword plus 15. And in this case, your function should return an object with two key value pairs. So item, which is equal to sword, and damage, which is equal to 15. The second example is very similar. So we have bow plus 8. And now you can see that we just changed the values inside of this object, but we still have two key value pairs. And then in the third input, we have wrong text. So our regex pattern should validate that this input is invalid, and then our function should return null. Actually, you can solve this function in two different ways. So in the first way, you can use normal capturing groups. So like we used here, we just used capturing groups without names. And in this case, we need to access the value by using the indexes. So at first, try solving this challenge by using normal capturing groups. And then try solving this challenge in the second way when you use naming for your capturing groups. So instead of accessing your values by using indexes, you write names for your groups. I hope that you will solve it yourself, but if you have any problems or if you want to compare your solution with mine, in this case, let's solve it together. At first, I add the example inputs to the text string area, and then let's select our flags. So while we are on this website, I will use the global flag just because I want to see all matches inside of the match information tab. But before copying this pattern into our function, you need to remove this flag. And then I will also use the case insensitive flag because lowercase letters and uppercase letters are both valid. So then let's think about structure that we will have. I think that our match should select an entire line if this is valid, and then we should write two groups. So the first group will select just an item from our match, so for example sword, and the second group will select the damage, so for example 15. And then we will work just with values from our groups. So at first, let's write our match. I start from the characters class that contains a range of numbers. And because we use the case insensitive flag, all English letters are valid. And after that, I use the quantifier from 1 until unlimited because I don't want to select each letter individually. I want to select an entire word. Then we can see that we have a space. Let's just add it into our pattern. And then we have a plus that indicates our damage. But if I just write plus, you will see that it will not be selected because this is a special symbol. If you hover over it, you will see that this is a quantifier. If we want to select the literal value of the symbol, we need to escape it. So just add the backslash before the plus sign. And now if you hover over it, you will see that we matches the character plus. So this is no longer a quantifier. And then let's also add a character class for our numbers. And now you can see that this pattern works correctly because it matches with only valid lines. You can also simplify this pattern. So for example, instead of the character classes, you can use shorthands like \d for numbers and \w for words. But in this case, this is very important to select the pattern that will be easier to read. If this is easy for you to read this pattern, you can use this one, but just for clarity, I will use character classes. So now all what we need to do is just to define our capturing groups. So the first group will be around the first character class, and it will also include the quantifier. So and now in the match information tab, you can see that inside of the first group, we have sword and bow. So it works correctly. And then just add the second group for numbers. And now you can see that we have the match sword space plus 15. So in the first group we have sword, and in the second group we have 15. And the same for bow, so this pattern works correctly. Also before copying this pattern, make sure to remove the global flag. And now if you had any problems, you can copy this pattern and try solving the challenge until the end yourself. But then let's continue together. So now on the left side, you can see my console with 3 times word undefined from 3 different console logs. So it means that I'm connected to the browser and I can start solving this challenge. At first, let's add our pattern. So then let's use the match function and let's store it inside of the match result. So at this time, let's return the match result to see what it is equal to. So now you can see that we have 2 arrays and 1 null from 3 console logs. So let's expand the first array So here we have our match, and then we have two groups. The group with index 1 will be an item, and the group with index 2 will be the damage. So now, instead of returning our pattern, let's create the object result. Now I wrote the object result. So you can see that we have two key value pairs. Item that gets the value from the match result by accessing it with index 1, and then damage. It also gets the value from the match result, just it uses the index 2. Then in the console you can see that first two lines with the results that we expect, but the third line throws an error. If you read it, you can see that cannot read properties of null reading 1. So basically what happens is, if match result is equal to null, and if we try to access the null by index 1, you will get this kind of error because null can't be accessed by index. It just doesn't have any values inside of the index. So, and it means that before accessing the values by using array indexes, we need to make sure that the match result is not equal to null. So let's handle this case first. And now you can see that all results inside of the console match with the results that we expected, which means that this function works correctly. But as I said, this is just the first way how you can solve this challenge. Now let's solve this challenge by using the naming for groups. So at first, let's call our groups inside of the pattern. So now we have names for our groups, and it means that we don't need to create the JavaScript object manually. So let's remove those lines. And let's just return the match result to see what is equal to. Now in the console, if you expand the first array, you will see that it contains the property groups. So let's expand them. It contains two properties, damage and item. This is exactly the result that we expect, and it means that instead of creating the JavaScript object manually, we can just return the match result.groups. And now you can again see that we have the right answers in the console, which means that our function works correctly. MatchAll function in Regex. Let's learn about MatchAll function by solving this code challenge. In this code challenge, you will need to implement the function extract loop items that expects one parameter text. This function should extract all loop items from the parameter text. One item must contain item's name and item's value. So for example, sword plus 15, sword is the item's name and 15 is the item's value. Items are separated by comma and space, like sword plus 15, then we have comma, space, shield plus 8. And the function itself should return an array of objects. So for example, we have this input, sword plus 15, shield plus 8, and potion plus 50. In this case, our function returns an array of objects. And you see that each item from the string we extract into a separate object, and this object contains two key value pairs, item with the value sword and value with the value 50. The same for shield and the same for potion. In the next example, we have only one value, but anyway this function returns an array of objects, but in this case we have just one object, item with the value bow and value with the value 25. And the last example is an edge case. So here in the input we have random text, and it means that we don't have any matches. And in this case, our function returns an empty array. So at first, let's write the regex pattern for this challenge. For that, I go to the website regex101.com, and here in the text string area, I paste the example inputs. So now try writing this pattern yourself. Your pattern should have one match, for example, sword plus 15, and inside of this match, you should make two groups. So the one group will contain the item's name, like sword, and the second group will contain the item's value, like 15. So but now, let's write this pattern together. At first, I need to choose flags. I think that I will use the global flag because I want to have multiple matches. And also I will use the case insensitive flag because I accept both lowercase and uppercase letters. Then we need to think about what we want to have in our match. So at first, I want to have the item's name, like sword, shield, potion, or bow. So for that, let's create a character class that accepts all English letters. But I don't want to select an individual letter, I want to select an entire word. So for that, let's write the quantifier from 1 until unlimited. I will use the shorthand plus, and if you hover over it, you will see that this is a quantifier from 1 until unlimited. So now we select all words from the text string area, but before items value, we have a separator space. So let's add space to our pattern. And then we also have the plus sign for the value, so let's add it as well. But if I add just plus sign, you will see that this is a quantifier, so I need to escape the symbol. And now you can see that we have the plus sign in the match information tab. And after that, I also want to select numbers, so I will create a new character class. But I don't want to select just the first digit, I want to select an entire number. So for that, I again add the quantifier from 1 until unlimited. And now, as you see, we have all matches from the text string area. So now we can use capturing groups to make two different groups. As you remember, capturing groups create submatch within of our match. So for example, we have match sword plus 15. From this match, I want to create two groups. The first group will contain the item's name, sword, and the second group will contain the item's value, 15. For that, I surround the pattern for words into the parentheses, and now you can see that this is the capturing group. Also in the match information tab, you can see that after the match sword plus 15, we have the group 1 with the value sword. So then let's do the same for the value. So now, as you see, we have our match, and then we have two groups. In the first group, we have the item's name, like sword, and in the second group, we have the item's value, like 15. Now it means that our pattern works correctly, and now we can copy this pattern and use for solving our challenge. Now, on the right side, you can see the VS Code, and on the left side, you can see the browser with the console. And also you see 3 times word undefined, which means that we are connected to our browser. And now we can start solving our challenge. So at first, let's add this pattern. So then we need to select one of the functions for solving our challenge. At this point, we know match and test functions, and you might think that match function suits perfectly because it returns an array of all matches. So let's try using the match function. And also, as you can see, the match function returns the regular expression match array. So now let's return the match result to see what it is equal to. And now you can see that we have all our matches in the console. So let's expand the first match. And here you can see that we have sword plus 15, shield plus 8, and potion plus 50. But the one problem inside of this array is that we don't have our capturing groups. So now what we see is a common array. Even though that in the description of match function, it is said that this function returns regular expression match array. But this is the confusing point of this function. When we use the G flag inside of our pattern, this function returns a common array. So let's remove the G flag, and now you can see more info inside of our arrays. So let's expand the first one, and here you can see that we have our match, and then we have two subgroups, so sword and 15. And also we have additional metadata like groups, index, and input. So this is a regular expression match array. This is just a common array with additional properties. But now we have the second problem. Inside of this array, we have only one match and then the first and second groups for this match. So if we don't use the G flag, it means that our pattern finds only first match and then it returns the execution. So if we want to find multiple matches, we need to use the G flag. But in this case, we can't use our capturing groups. So this was actually the problem why matchAll function was introduced into JavaScript. So now let's try using the matchAll function. But then, if I save this result, you will see that now it is equal to regular expression string iterator. And to be honest, I don't know why this is so complicated in JavaScript that now, instead of returning an array of all matches, it returns the regular expression string iterator. But anyway, iterator just means that if you want to extract the value, you need to use some kind of for loop, for example, for of loop. So now I wrote the for loop where we extract one match from the match result, and then I log it to the console. So now if you scroll until the top of our logs, you will see that the first log that we have is a regular expression match array. So as we had with match function without G flag, and it contains the first match, sword plus 15, and also two groups for this match. But then if you close this array, you will see that the second value that we have is the second match, shield plus 8, and it also contains contains 2 groups, and so on for potion and then for bow. So if we use the matchAll array, we don't lose our matches and we don't lose our groups. And now let's just create the structure that we expect. So this function needs to return an array. So let's create a new array. Then I will also return this result array. So now, instead of iterators in the console, you can see empty arrays. And then, inside of the for of loop, we can create our objects. So this object contains 2 key value pairs. So the first key value pair is item with item's name. Now let's scroll until the top of our logs, and here let's expand the first array. Then you will see that with the index 0, you can access our match. Then with the index 1, you can access the item's name. And this is exactly what I do here. So the key of the object is item, and the value I extract by using the index 1. And then I will do the same for value. And now, as you also see in this console, we can access the item's value by index 2. So and then I just need to push this match object into the results array. So now in the console you can see 3 outputs. So the first output contains an array of 3 objects. So this is exactly what we expect from the first input. Now let's expand this array, and now let's expand the first object. And you can see that it contains the item sword and the value 15. Let's expand the remaining objects. So here item shield and value 8, and the last one item potion and value 50. So the first input is the same as we expected. Now let's check the second input. It is equal to an array of object, and this is exactly what we expect for the second input. And now let's expand it, and you can see that we have item bow and value 25. And then for the last input, you can see that we return an empty array, and this is because we don't have any matches. So all inputs return what we expected, and it means that our function works correctly. Now let's wrap what we have learned. In the cases when you want to use capturing groups and when you want to use the G flag, multiple matches, you need to use the matchAll function. But this function returns an iterator, and to extract the value from iterator, you just need to create the for of loop. And then the value that you extract, so in our case match, will be equal to regular expression match array, which is a common array with additional properties. And then you can work with it as with a normal array. Replace function in Regex. Let's learn about replace function by solving this code challenge. In this challenge, you will need to implement the function sensor message that expects one parameter message, which is a string. And this function should censor bad words. So this function needs to replace words like noob, stupid, and idiot with 3 asterisks. And the function itself should return an updated message. And here are some of the example inputs. So at first we have a message, you are a noob. And then as you see, we need to replace noob with 3 asterisks. The second example contains 2 words, stupid and idiotic. But as you see, because idiotic is not directly in our scope, so only the word idiot in our scope, we change the word idiot to 3 asterisks, and we remain with the ending of this word. In the next example, we don't have any bad words, and in this case we return the same message as we had. And also on edge case, if we have an empty string, this function also should return an empty string. So we can split this challenge into 2 parts. So in the first part we need to write the regex pattern that will detect all these bad words, and in the second part we will replace them with 3 asterisks. So at first I go to the website regex101.com, and here inside of the text string area I put example inputs. So now you can try writing this pattern yourself, but then we can write it together. So at first let's choose our flags. I'll use the global flag because we might have several bad words in one sentence, and also I will use the case insensitive flag, but you can also solve it without this flag. Just I want to detect uppercase letters also. So and then let's write our regex pattern. So the pattern here is very simple. We just list all target words that we want to replace, and then we put OR operator between them. So now we can copy this pattern, and now we can implement our function. Now on the right side you can see my VS Code, and on the left side you can see the console from the browser. And here we see 4 times word undefined because we have 4 console logs. So it means that we are connected to our browser and we can start solving our challenge. So at first let's add the regex pattern. So then we need to use one of the functions where we will use this regex pattern. At this point we know the test, match and match all functions, but here we will use the replace function. And if you look to the description of the replace function, we need to attach it to a string, so for example message, and then it expects two parameters. So the first parameter is searching value. It can be a string, so literal string that we want to replace, or it can be a regular pattern. So this is what we will use. And then the second parameter is the replace value. So this is the value that we want to see instead of our target group. For the search value, I will add our regex pattern. And for the replace value, I will add 3 asterisks. And now let's return the updated message. And then, if you look to the console, you can see that we have the same results as we expected, and this means that our function works correctly. So now we're replacing our target group. But often, if one of these words is a part of a bigger word, so like here, the word idiot is the part of the word idiotic, we don't want to replace a bigger word. And in this case, you can just surround your pattern with word boundaries. And then, if I save this file, you will see in the console that the word idiotic is not replaced anymore. So this is just a trick that we often want to use in this kind of functions. It also has an additional feature that you will see in this challenge. So in this challenge, you will need to implement the function format name that expects one parameter full name, which is a string. This function should convert full name from one format, which is the first name space last name, to the second format, which is the last name, comma, space, and first name. And then this function should return an updated name. And here are some of the example inputs. So for example, John Smith, we should return the Smith, comma, space, John. So we replace the first and last name, and also we add the comma after the last name. So this is the second example, Dragon Player. So as you see, even nicknames we can change to the player, comma, space, dragon. But if we have incorrect format, so as you see here, instead of the space, we have comma. In this case, this function should return the input string. And again, we can solve this challenge in two parts. So in the first part, we need to write the regex pattern, and in the second part, we need to write the replace logic. So for that, I return back to the website, and now I put new example strings into the text string area. So now, again, you can try writing this pattern your own, but then let's write this pattern together. So at first, let's choose the flags that we will use. I will put the global flag, even though that we expect only one string, full name and last name. It will help us to control all the inputs on this website. So before copying this pattern, we can remove the global flag. And then I will also add the case insensitive flag because we want to take into account both uppercase and lowercase letters. So now, inside of our pattern, we need to detect the first name. So basically this is a word and tilde space. So for that, let's write the character class. And then we need to add the quantifier, because now we select each letter individually. I will add the quantifier from 1 until unlimited. And now you can see that we select all our words separately, but I want to select an entire string full name. So for that, I add space. And then I add the same pattern for selecting the last name. So now you see that we have two matches, and we don't have our match with incorrect format because it contains comma instead of space. So now we can copy this pattern, but at first I remove the global flag. So now again, in the console you can see 3 times word undefined, and this is because we have 3 console logs and our function returns nothing. So but it means that we are connected to our browser and we can start solving this challenge. So let's add our pattern to the function format name. Then we need to use one of the regex functions. In this case, we will use the replace function. But our second parameter will be special. So now, instead of the second parameter, I put empty string, but actually what we want is we want to detect the first name and then we want to put it to the end. So now, instead of the second parameter, I put this construction like $2, comma, space, $1. $1 in this case means the first variable. It should be the first name from our pattern. And then the $2 means the second variable, which will be the last name from our pattern. And then comma and space are just strings. So for example, in the results, you can see that we have comma and space. So only $2 and $1 will be replaced with some variables. So but at first, let's return the updated name to see what it is equal to. So and now you see quite interesting result. So at first we have literally the $2, comma, space $1, and if we have incorrect format, we return the same input string. So now we need to actually think where our pattern can take these variables. For better demonstration, I returned back to the website, and here in the match information tab, we have only our match. But actually we want to find two variables. So the first variable will be from our first name. We can select it by making a capturing group. So now in the match information tab, you can see that we have group 1, which is the first name John. And then let's also make the capturing group for the last name. So now you can see that we have our match John space Smith, and then we have the first variable, which is John, and the second variable, which is Smith. So now let's copy this pattern and return back to our function. Here I replace our pattern, and now you can see that we have the same results as we expected, which means that our function works correctly. So here is important to remember that when you see dollar in our strings, this is not always the literal dollar sign. It can be a variable, and this is actually what is used in many languages. And finally, let's use the knowledge from this video to solve the last challenge. But on this time, I will not solve it with you. At first, I will explain you the challenge, and then I will show you the answer. So you will need to solve this challenge yourself based on the knowledge from this video. In this challenge, you will need to implement the function formatDate that expects one parameter date, which is a string. This function should detect the first format, which is year, then dash, month, dash, day. And then this function should change this format to the day dot month dot year. So then this is important that your function should just change the format. It shouldn't validate the date. If you have date from the future, like this one, your function anyway should change this format. And then this function should return an updated date. And here are some of the example inputs. So in the first input, we have the age 2026. So based on the second format, it goes to the end of the string. Then we have the 6th month, and month stays in the same place. And then we have the first date, which goes to the beginning of a new format. So the second example is very similar, just except that this date is from the future, but our function doesn't care about it, so it can anyway detect the date and then change the format. And then if we have the wrong date that is out of our pattern, we just return the same input. And as I said, try solving this challenge yourself, and after 5 seconds I will show you my solution. So this is the solution that I have. Here we have quite long regex pattern, but you can see 3 capturing groups. So the first capturing group is a year. We have a character class that detects all numbers, and then we have the quantifier 4, which means that we're looking exactly for 4 digits. Then you see that we have a dash, and then we have our second capturing group. This is a month. Then we again have a dash, and then we have the same capturing group, but now this is for day. And also I included my pattern into anchors, so you can see the beginning anchor and the end anchor. So actually you can solve this pattern even without these anchors, but this is just for additional safety. So with these anchors, it means that if something inside of my input doesn't match with an entire pattern, so for example, we have an exclamation mark in the end, in this case, my function will not change this format, it will just return the input string. But if you remove the anchor points from the pattern, in this case, your function will give this result. So it will change the format of the date, and then it will also include all characters that are out of our pattern. So depending on which behavior you need, you may include or not include the anchors. Lookahead and Lookbehind in Regex. So at first, I will show you one problem, and then we will try to solve it without Lookahead or Lookbehind. I added some input into the text string area, and now imagine that we want to write this pattern that will select only numbers that are preceded by the $sign. So for example, here I have $15, so this number I want to select. So for writing this pattern, at first, I need to select flags. I will use the global flag because I want to find all matches. So then let's write the pattern that will select $sign and a number. So at first I added $sign because this is the first symbol that I want to find, but if you hover over it, you will see that $sign is a special symbol in Regex. So it means that if we want to find literally this symbol, we need to escape it. So now you see the $sign in the match information tab. So and then I want to select a range of numbers. But now I don't want to select just the first digit, I want to select an entire number that is preceded by the $sign. So for that I can add a quantifier. So for example, from 1 until unlimited. And now you can see that we find all numbers that are preceded by the $sign. But here we have one problem. Typically, when you write functions, you don't want to work with $sign, you want to work only with the number. So it means that yes, we use the $sign for filtering. Based on this sign, we found which numbers we need, but then we will anyway continue to work only with a number. And now it means that if we will use this regex pattern, later in our function, we will need to write the code that will remove the $sign from this match. But if we want to do it inside of the regex pattern, one of the solutions that we know is capturing groups. Capturing group can find a submatch inside of our match, and this is the reason why now you see that our match 1 is $15, but the group 1 contains just the number 15. And later, inside of our function, we can just access the group 1. But anyway, in this case, we still have useless matches. So now only the group 1 is useful. So do I have a way how to select our match without the $sign, but where the $sign will be used as the filtering of our string? And this is actually the problem that can be solved by using the lookahead and lookbehind. So at first I remove the capturing group, and then I will write the syntax for the lookbehind. And at first, you can see that in the match information tab, we have all the matches without the $sign. But at the same time, if you look to the text string area, you can see that we select all the numbers that are preceded by the $sign. And now, if you hover over this construction, you will see that this is a positive lookbehind. And you can translate it as preceded by. So now it means that our character class is preceded by the $sign. So now let's look to a different problem. Imagine that now I want to write the pattern that will select all the numbers that are followed by the px. Like here we have 320 px. So at first, let's write the pattern that will select the number with px inside of the match. So now you see in the match information tab that we have 4 matches, but again, we include px inside of this match. But now we can't use the lookbehind because our number is not preceded by the px, it is followed by the px. If you hear the phrase followed by, in this case, we can use the positive look ahead. So now I surrounded the px into the positive look ahead syntax, and then you can see that we have only numbers inside of our match. But at the same time, we used px for filtering of these numbers. So the positive look ahead can be translated like followed by, and positive look behind can be translated like preceded by. And both of these constructions we use to filter for some kind of character class that will not be a part of our match. So now you learned the basic theory. Let's practice with solving several code challenges. In this challenge, you will need to implement the function extract prices that expects one parameter text, which is a string. So this function should extract prices from the input text. Price is a number after the $sign. Prices are preceded by the $sign. And the function itself should return an array of prices. And here are some of the example inputs. In the first input, we have 3 words and 3 different prices. And as you see, this function should return all 3 different prices inside of the array. And also you can see that all these prices are surrounded by quotes. So it means that the type of these prices is a string. In the second example, we don't have any prices. So in this case, we should return an empty array. And in the last example, we have 2 numbers, but one is a price and the second one is just a number. So we return an array with 1 price, which is 100. And now we can solve this challenge by splitting it into 2 parts. So in the first part, we will write the regex pattern, and in the second part, we will use one of the regex functions for implementing this function. So at first, I returned back to the website. And here, inside of the text string area, I added all example inputs. So and now, you can try writing this pattern your own by using the knowledge about lookahead and lookbehind from this video. But then, let's write this pattern together. So at first, I need to select flags. I will use the global flag because I want to find all matches. So and then, we can start writing our pattern. So in the beginning, I can write the pattern that will include the $sign into the match. So now we see that we select all the numbers that are preceded by the $sign. You hear the construction preceded by, so it means that we can use the positive lookbehind for filtering our pattern by the $sign, but to not include it inside of our match. And now you can see that we have 4 matches and all these matches contain only numbers. And you also can see that we don't include the number 25 because this number is not preceded by the $sign. So now we can copy this pattern and then we can implement our function. Now on the right hand side you can see the VS Code, and on the left hand side you can see the console, and also you can see the 3 times word undefined, so it means that we are connected to our console. And now we can start implementing our challenge. So at first let's add the regex pattern. Then let's think what kind of regex function we will use. We want to return an array of prices. So I think that we can use the match function because match function returns an array of all matches. So now I stored the match result into a separate variable and then I return this variable. So if you look to the console, you can see that the first and the third results are the same as we expected. But the second result returns null, but we want to have an empty array. So we need to remember that the match function returns null when it can't find any matches. And for converting it into an empty array, we can add a new if statement. And now you can see that we have all the results that we expected, so it means that our function works correctly. Before solving the next challenge, let's learn about negative look ahead and negative look behind. So now imagine that we want to write the regex pattern that will select all numbers that are not preceded by the $sign. So at first I can write this pattern with positive look behind. Also I can add the global flag to see all matches. But now it means that we select all the numbers that are preceded by the $sign. But actually if we want to select the opposite numbers, we can change the positive look behind to the negative look behind. All what you need to do for that is just to change the equal sign to an exclamation mark. And now you can see that this construction is called negative look behind. And if you look to our results, you can see that we select all numbers that are not preceded by the $sign, but at the same point, we have one unexpected behavior. So for example, if we have this construction like $sign 15, in this case, we select just the digit 5. And this is because the digit 5 is not preceded by the $sign, but we understand that this digit is a part of a number that is preceded by the $sign. So, and if we want to fix this behavior, we can add a word boundary. So, and word boundary here means that if we have a number that doesn't have any spaces inside of it, it must not be preceded by the $sign in order to be matched. So like here you see that we have $sign 15, and because this number don't have any spaces, we don't select this number. But if I add space and then I write any number, you will see that this number will be selected. So actually this is a very common construction. So if you use negative look behind, very often you want to use word boundaries inside of your pattern to solve this kind of problems as we had. And now I also want to show you how to filter for specific condition. So imagine that we have just this input like user123, and now we want to validate that this username contains at least one number. In this case, we can write a generic pattern that will select an entire line, and after that we can filter by using the positive or negative look ahead. So at first I add this construction dot, which means a character class of all possible symbols, and then I add a quantifier from 1 until unlimited. Now you see that we select an entire line, but then let's write the filter that will check that this line contains at least one number. So at first I start from the construction of positive look ahead, and then I add this structure like dot asterisk. And if you think, so dot is a character class of all possible symbols, and then asterisk means from 0 until unlimited. So when you add this combination, it actually means that our positive look ahead will scan an entire line, and then it can check for the condition that we will write after the asterisk. So if I want to check a digit, I can add a character class of digits. And now you see that we still have our match. This is also important to remember that character class by default has the quantifier 1. So let's explicitly add this. So now this quantifier doesn't change anything, but now you see a full pattern of how to write filters. So now let's change this condition to, we want to filter that our line contains at least 4 digits. In this case, I just changed this quantifier from 1 to 4. Now you see that we don't have matches anymore, but if I add one more digit, In this case, our line contains 4 digits, and this is the reason why we have our match. In the same way, if I want to filter that our line does not contain any digits, I can change the quantifier to 1, and then instead of the positive look ahead, I can use the negative one. And now you can see, because our line contains 4 digits, we don't have our match. But if I remove them, in this case, we have our match user. So from the first point of view, this construction might feel very confusing, but actually this is a very common construction for filtering for some kind of condition. And to better feel this construction, let's practice with this code challenge. In this challenge, you will need to implement the function validate non-admin username that expects one parameter username, which is a string. So this function should validate username by the following conditions. So at first, username must not contain the word admin. Then the username may contain only letters or digits, and the length of the username must be from 4 until 8 characters. And the function itself should return true or false. And here are some of the example inputs. So the first input is Dragon99. And as you see, this function returns true. And this is because our input doesn't contain the word admin. Also, it contains only letters and digits, even though that we have uppercase and lowercase letters. The length of this input is 8 characters, which is within the allowed characters length. So and this is the reason why this function returns true. The next username is superadmin. And as you see, our function returns false. And this is because our input contains the word admin. So the next username is too long name. In this case, our function also returns false, and this is because the length of this username is more than 8 characters. And the final example input is bad_name. In this case, our function also returns false, and this is because the username may contain only letters and digits. It must not contain any other characters, like underscore. So again, we can solve this challenge by splitting it into 2 parts. So in the first part, write the regex pattern. And in the second part, use one of the regex functions for implementing this function. Now I return back to the website. Here into the text string area, I added first 3 lines with the conditions. So it is easier to check what should be inside of our regex pattern. And then I added all example inputs. And now try writing the regex pattern yourself by using the knowledge from this video. But then let's write it together. So at first, we need to select flags. I will use the global flag. On this website, I want to see all possible matches. But before copying this pattern into our function, we will remove this flag. Also, I will use the case insensitive flag because we accept both lowercase and uppercase letters. And now let's start writing our pattern. Here we also split our pattern into 2 parts. So at first, we'll write the part that is responsible for our match, and then we will add the filtering part. As I showed previously, you can start from this condition, like dot plus. In this case, dot is our character class, plus is our quantifier. So now we need to think what kind of condition we can implement first. I actually think that we can start from the second condition, that username may contain only letters and digits. So for that, we need to replace our current character class by the character class that will have only letters and numbers. Now you can see that we don't select spaces. Also, we don't select underscore or dash. So it means that the second condition is satisfied. Then let's continue with the third condition. So username must be 4 to 8 characters long. For that, I can change our quantifier to a custom one. So now you can see that we have only matches from 4 until 8 characters. So it means that the third condition is also satisfied. And now let's return back to the first condition. So this is actually the filter that says that our username must not contain the word admin. So here we see that we have the construction must not contain. So it means that I can use the negative look ahead for filtering. I added the negative look ahead syntax, but then I want that negative look ahead would scan for an entire line. So for that, I add this combination like dot asterisk, and then I can start writing our condition. So we don't want to have the word admin, so I will just add it inside of the negative look ahead. And now, if you look to the example inputs, you can see that the first input is selected. This is because the first input satisfies all our conditions. But then in the second input, you can see that we select only the part admin, because this part also satisfies all our conditions. But we know that this line has the word admin inside, so we want to have a match only if an entire line satisfies all 3 conditions. So for that, I can add 2 anchors. But now you see that we don't have any matches, and this is because if we use anchors, by default we scan only the first line. So for example, if I add the multi-line flag, in this case you will see that we have match Dragon99, and this is the only one match that we should find among all these inputs. So now, before copying this pattern, let's deselect the global flag and also the multi-line flag. And now if we stay with only one line, you can see that we still have our match. So this is exactly what we want. So now let's copy this pattern and then let's implement our function. So now you can see that on the right hand side we have our VS Code, and on the left hand side we have our console with 4 times word undefined. So now we can start solving our challenge. At first, let's add the regex pattern. Then let's think what kind of function we will use for implementing this challenge. So validate non-admin username should return true or false. We have a regex function test that returns true if we have any matches and returns false if we don't have any matches. So let's use it with our pattern. And now you can see that we have 1 word true and 3 false. So this is exactly what we expected, and it means that our function works correctly. And finally, let's solve the most complex regex challenge. Here you will need to implement the function validate password that expects one parameter password, which is a string. Password must contain the following points: at least 1 lowercase letter, at least 1 uppercase letter, at least 1 digit, and minimum 6 characters long. And then the function itself should return true or false. And here are some of the example inputs. So the first input has the password dragon123, and you see that our function returns true. So this is because our input has some lowercase letters, 1 uppercase letter, 3 digits, and 8 characters, which is more than minimum. So this is the reason why our function returns true. So the next example input is dragon123, but all letters are lowercase letters. And this is the reason why this function should return false. Then we have the input dragon123 with only uppercase letters. So in this case, we also return false. Then we have the word dragon. So at first this is too small, and at second it doesn't contain any digits. So we return false. So now try solving this challenge yourself. And after 5 seconds, I will show you my solution. So this is the pattern that I had. It contains 3 different filters. So for lowercase letter, uppercase letter, and digits, the default character class is a dot, and this is because except of these filters, we might have any characters. And then I used the custom quantifier from 6 until unlimited. Also, I surrounded this pattern into anchors, and this is because I want that an entire line would satisfy all conditions in order to be matched. And then I used the test function because it returns true or false. Huge congratulations on completing this regex course. Now you have a solid understanding of regular expressions and you can confidently use them in your own JavaScript projects. Continue learning with new code challenges and projects on my channel. Good luck and enjoy your regex journey.